I was taking a solo trip to Salt Lake City last year, a rare opportunity to enjoy a vacation on my own. I'd never had many chances to travel alone, as my previous trips were always with family. This time, I was determined to relish my time away from the daily grind. In preparation for my journey, I researched accommodations in the area. I weighed my options between hotels and Airbnb rentals, and surprisingly, the latter seemed to offer nicer places at a more reasonable cost. The only catch was that the more affordable Airbnb options were a bit further from the city centre. However, I had my own car, so I wasn't too concerned about the extra distance. After browsing several listings, I settled on a well-sized Airbnb. I arrived at the Airbnb early in the morning, around 6 a.m. The place was clean and empty, just as expected. After bringing my luggage inside, I took a moment to explore the space and get a feel for it. The small living room with a cozy couch looked inviting, and the bedroom seemed comfortable, which were the essentials I needed. After getting settled, I turned on the TV, intending to unwind and enjoy a few moments of relaxation. My 10-hour drive to reach this destination had been tiring, and I was looking forward to a bit of downtime. As the hours passed, I dozed off on the couch. It was around 10 a.m. when I woke up, and the TV was still on. I reached for the remote to turn it off and decided to grab a glass of water before retiring to the bedroom. I got up and walked from the living room to the kitchen when I felt an abrupt cold breeze against my skin. With tired eyes, I glanced to my right and noticed that the front door was fully open. My heart pounded, as I was certain I had locked and closed the door when I arrived. I approached the door cautiously, listening for any sounds of someone inside the house. I should mention that I'm a fairly petite person, and I tend to be easily scared, particularly when I'm alone, especially at night. I don't usually enjoy interacting with strangers in such circumstances. As I stood near the open door, my anxiety grew. I knew there was a potential for a mistake, but the idea of someone entering the house without my knowledge frightened me. I called out, "Hello," into the open space beyond the door. To my surprise, I heard two men whispering to each other outside. They seemed to be having a conversation. The door didn't have a safety lock, and my fear escalated. I called out to the men, asking them what they wanted. Their response only deepened my confusion. "Hey, we're here for the Airbnb. Can you open the door?" one of the men called out. I was at a loss. I had rented the Airbnb, and the idea of strangers claiming to be there for it was unnerving. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. I was trying to piece together the situation as I stuttered, "What do you mean?" The man on the other side of the door explained that they had the place booked for the night. My thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of the situation. I was certain I had the reservation, and yet these men insisted they were the ones who had it. I mustered up the courage to tell them that I also had the Airbnb booked for the night, and they needed to contact the owner to resolve the issue. One of the men walked away, leaving the other behind, who continued to request entry. It was at that moment, as I watched the remaining man outside, that I decided not to open the door. Something felt amiss about the whole situation. It didn't sit right with me, and I sensed that I needed to play it safe. I told the man that my husband would be coming down to handle the situation in a few minutes. In reality, I was alone, but I hoped that the mention of a husband would deter any unwanted actions. I was playing it safe, as I didn't know what to expect. The man outside didn't respond. The silence was unsettling, and I was left to wonder about his intentions. I retreated from the door, still puzzled and alarmed. As I stood in the house, I realized I needed to take action. My first instinct was to call the police. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation to the operator and requesting immediate assistance. While I was on the phone with the operator, I decided to peer out of a small window, which allowed me to observe the men outside. To my shock and horror, I saw a group of about 5 people lurking further down the driveway, trying to conceal themselves as if they were waiting for a signal. They wore various face coverings, making it impossible to identify them. The situation took a darker turn as I realized that these people weren't here to resolve a booking misunderstanding. They were acting suspiciously, and I couldn't fathom what their true intentions were. The operator on the other end of the line urged me to remain calm and stay quiet while they dispatched police units to my location. I continued to watch the group outside as I stayed on the line, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. With every passing moment, my fear intensified. I was alone, with strangers attempting to gain entry into the house. It was as if a pack of wolves surrounded me, and I had no way of knowing when or how they might strike. I remained on the line with the 911 operator, listening to the footsteps and hushed conversations outside. The tension in the house was unbearable. I knew that my safety was at risk, and I could only hope that the police would arrive in time to protect me. The minutes dragged on, and I continued to watch the group outside, their intentions still unclear. I couldn't help but think about what had brought me to this terrifying moment, alone in a strange place, facing a potentially dangerous situation. As I waited for the police to arrive, my heart pounded and my thoughts raced. I was in a vulnerable position, and the only thing that kept me going was the hope that help would arrive soon. As I waited on the line with the 911 operator, I couldn't help but imagine the worst-case scenarios. The minutes felt like an eternity, and the tension in the house was unbearable. I listened to the muffled footsteps and hushed conversations of the group outside. Their intentions remained unclear, and fear continued to gnaw at me. I was alone and vulnerable, hoping that the police would arrive in time to ensure my safety. As the police cars approached, the group outside seemed to sense the impending arrival of law enforcement. Panic spread among them, and they began to scatter, retreating from the house. I watched as they fled, their faces still concealed by masks. By the time the police officers entered the house, the intruders had disappeared. The officers assessed the situation, and I explained what had transpired. They assured me that the area had been experiencing similar incidents, with groups or gangs breaking into homes, primarily for robbery rather than causing harm to the residents. The police's presence offered some comfort, but the aftermath was unsettling. My car, parked outside, had its window shattered, and my belongings had been stolen. The group of intruders had looted the house, leaving me feeling violated and vulnerable. The incident left a lasting impact on me, and I couldn't shake the anxiety it had instilled. It was a stark reminder of the risks associated with staying at Airbnb properties, especially when traveling alone. Despite the kindness of the Airbnb owner, who provided a refund, the memory of that harrowing experience continued to haunt me. I couldn't help but replay the events in my mind, questioning the intentions of those intruders and the randomness of their choice. It made me hesitant to stay in an Airbnb alone ever again. I owned an Airbnb house for several years. I stopped due to the stress of keeping up with it as well as maintaining my actual job. The benefits of using Airbnb instead of renting the place out like you normally would is that you would have the chance to make a lot more money if your house gets booked a lot. Being in a relatively high traffic area for vacations, Airbnb was a great option for us. My wife and I were excited in the beginning, but it got more demanding as more people booked the house. We needed to keep everything on schedule and hire cleaning services after the first customers left and before the next ones came, as well as be sure to respond to their messages and emails in a timely manner. But things were going well for a couple of years before we had what we thought was a young couple staying at the house. Just like every other time when they arrived, I texted them the unlock code for the door. I almost never actually see the customers. After they let me know that they were inside and everything was good, I sat back and relaxed for the rest of my day off. I should also mention that I almost never even talk to the customers more than just a couple texts. Usually, they text me when they get there and when they leave, and sometimes an occasional question about the house, but that's usually it. But as 9 o'clock came around, and I was just about to get ready for bed, I got a text from the young man staying at the house. It was short, saying he was going to call me in a minute, and then a minute later, he called. I already had a bad feeling when I saw the text, but what he said still surprised me. He said that the water wasn't working in the house. Of course, I apologized, though I didn't understand how that could be possible. But living in a house without water is unacceptable, so I knew I had to get it fixed immediately. I asked if I could come check it out really quick so that I could have someone come in the morning to fix it. He agreed, being very polite about the whole thing, and I drove over there a few minutes later. Pulling into the driveway, I noticed 2 cars. At the time, this wasn't necessarily a red flag, but more just an odd thing I noticed because they were apparently a young couple on vacation for a single night. So I didn't understand why they would rent 2 separate cars. I thought someone must be visiting them, which actually isn't allowed, but I didn't mind so much. I walked up to the front door and knocked before entering the code and walking inside. It was very quiet. I expected them to be waiting for me, but they weren't anywhere that I could see. I probably should have looked around for them first, but I was tired and just wanted to get this over with. The first thing I wanted to check was the main water valve to make sure there wasn't a leak or a flood. So I went down to the basement and over to the valve. Everything seemed normal, no water anywhere or signs of damage. I was confused, but then I fiddled with the valve and immediately heard water start rushing again. I turned it more, realizing it had been completely shut off manually. I stayed in the basement for another minute, trying to understand why this was done before I started to get a really uncomfortable feeling, especially since I didn't even see the people when I walked inside. I just couldn't see how it could have been anyone other than them who turned off the water, which meant they were trying to get me to come over on purpose, or maybe give them a discount on their stay for the inconvenience. I decided I was going to leave and get my car, then try calling them back just to be safe. I got up and started walking towards the stairs until I heard the basement door open, followed by multiple sets of footsteps walking down. When they got to the bottom, 3 men stood there. "Is it fixed?" one of them said, sounding like the same man I talked to on the phone, though all of these men were much older than the young man that I thought was staying at the house. I told him it should be working now and that the valve must have just tightened on its own. I was trying not to point any blame since the whole thing was making me so uncomfortable. I just wanted to get out of that basement and away from these guys. They all just kind of stood there, looking at me, not saying anything after that. "Well, let me know if you need anything else," I said, walking between them, trying to get to the stairs. They still just stood there, watching me walk around them. But as I went past the 3rd guy closest to the stairs, I spotted a gun shoved in the back of his pants. It made me freak out a little, and I rushed a bit quicker up the stairs, but they didn't follow. They stayed in the basement as I quickly walked out the door and drove away. When I got home, I woke up my wife and told her what had happened. She convinced me to call the police to check up on them. They weren't the people we thought were staying there, and the situation was strange, so it felt justified. I think we waited 20 minutes before a call came from an officer claiming nobody seemed to be home, and that he may need me to open the door. I gave him the code instead, and he called back another 20 minutes later, saying that there was no signs of anyone still being there. The next day, we found out the card the man paid with was stolen, and after looking around the house, they had stolen some expensive decorations and appliances as well. I guess there never actually was a young couple either. The one thing that was left unexplained was their whole plan with the water not working. I think they either wanted me to not charge them for their stay, so that hopefully they could use the stolen card for longer, or they were planning on robbing me at gunpoint. But then that makes me question why they didn't. 3 dangerous, unidentified men blocking my exit in the basement after leading me into a trap. And they just let me go. It doesn't make sense to me, but after that, I never went to the house while customers were home, and a few months later, we stopped using Airbnb and just put the house up for rent.